This will be an example of the research article questions that I have on a few modules. And this one is associated with depression. And what I looked for is a recent article that was more applied in nature associated with the topic. And there is one in module 6, I believe, associated with diabetes. So the article is about Bikram yoga and aerobic exercise and depression in women. And you'll see that this is from 2021, and it's Journal of Affective Disorders, which is one that we might not typically look at. The first question is, what was the purpose of the study? And what I looked at is really in the introduction, you'll always see, therefore, the purpose of the study is, or the primary goal is, and I just highlighted that and copied it just so you can see that's really the basic purpose of the study. The introduction gives you some background and about why it's done. And so what follows is just a short paragraph about why the question what the question was and the basis of what the research project was. And from what you should remember from the depression is that exercise does have an impact, a positive impact on depression, and that what is not understood is, well, what we do know is that it's more aerobic exercise. And so this group wanted to look at yoga, and they wanted to get a yoga that was really standardized, and Bikram yoga is pretty, there's a couple types, but this one was a standardized form of yoga. And so they were interested, the authors were interested in evaluating the depression through a couple different, and potentially see why does exercise have a positive impact. The second question is methodology, and you can see I just have a short, brief paragraph, and this identifies how many, what the sex was, if there's anything about a diagnostic criteria that's necessary, what the 3 intervention groups were. Well, there was actually a control group and then 2 intervention groups. The wait list was the control group, and it also identifies briefly how much exercise that the individuals did. There's also a mention about the assessments and when they were done. The third question is interpret and identify a table or graph. This has to be one of the results. And remember, if you do have challenges with this, I'm happy to meet with you about it. This is figure 2, and there are really 2 results, and I had to look at the description to really see this particular article doesn't indicate what is significant, and that was a little problematic, so I had to do some digging. But some of the reasons why they're looking at, like, why does depression change or improve with exercise? Well, perhaps it's the rumination, acceptance, how a person looks at hassles. And so they looked at, presented 2 figures, and the top figure is rumination. That's when somebody dwells on something over and over and over and over, and typically it's something negative. And acceptance is when you're not looking at it as a fault or anyone's fault, but it's almost my least favorite. It is what it is, but it's kind of on the line of that type of acceptance. So what they found is that awareness improved in the yoga group, and rumination declined in both the yoga group and the exercise group. Then it's provide a bullet point list of the findings, and so I just looked at the results section and got a couple of bullet points that kind of made sense to me, and it is listed here. Following 8 weeks of yoga or exercise, their depression scores were lower compared to the control group who had nothing. The 4 assessments that were done were involving rumination, how a person perceived their stress, acceptance, and their perception of hassles. And what they did find is that the yoga group had increased awareness, the exercise group had increased acceptance. So their mechanism of how their depression improved was different between the two groups. The final step is, what is the take-home application? And I just have a statement about what they found. They found that they postulated that exercise can interrupt the negative patterns and the negative thought patterns that's associated with depression, and that it might be different between the two exercise groups, that the awareness was improved in the yoga group and acceptance was improved in the mediated group, or excuse me, in the exercise group. But they also identified that there were some weaknesses and that only women were included. They were all pretty much a homogeneous group. In other words, they were all white. There was an unstandardized level of aerobic exercise. They had choices. But overall, if I look at what I would want to tell somebody, I would say that over 8 weeks of 2 times a week yoga and 2 times a week of aerobic exercise both had a positive impact on depression, where it could potentially be decreasing how somebody just ruminates and thinks about how bad their life is over and over and over.